Long ago, there was a great king who ruled over a wide land. He was strong, wise, and fair, and many servants worked for him every day. Some servants managed his farms, some collected money, and some kept records of what people owed the king. The king trusted them, but he also knew something very important, that trust must always walk together with honesty. One quiet morning, the king sat on his throne and thought deeply. He said to himself that it had been a long time since he checked the accounts of his servants. Money had gone out, money had come in, and promises had been made, but the truth had not yet been fully seen. So the king gave an order that echoed through the palace. He told his guards and helpers to bring all the servants who handled money, because he wanted to see their records and hear their explanations. One by one, the servants were brought before him. Some came with confidence, holding their books neatly. Others came slowly, with worried faces. The king listened carefully to each one, because he was not a king who rushed. He believed that every action has a reason, and every story deserves to be heard. Then, suddenly, one servant was brought forward who looked very different from the rest. His clothes were worn, his head was low, and his hands were shaking. The people around whispered softly, because they knew this servant owed the king a very large amount of money, more than he could ever count, more than he could ever earn in his whole life. The king looked at him closely, and the servant could not even raise his eyes. The room became very quiet. Everyone waited to hear what would happen next, because this moment would change everything. As people say today, when the truth shows up, excuses sit down. The servant stood there with nothing to hide anymore, knowing that the next words spoken would decide his future. The king looked at the servant for a long moment. His eyes were calm, but serious. Then the king spoke with a strong voice that everyone could hear. He said that the debt was too big and could not be ignored. He ordered that the servant, his family, and everything he owned should be taken to pay back what was owed. When the servant heard this, his heart felt like it was breaking into pieces. The servant fell down on the floor in front of the king. He did not stand tall anymore. He did not try to act brave. He knelt low, pressed his face to the ground, and began to beg. Tears filled his eyes as his voice shook. He said, "Please, my king, be patient with me. Please give me time. I promise I will pay you back." He did not know how he would do it, but fear pushed the words out of his mouth. Everyone in the room watched quietly. Some servants felt sorry for him. Others shook their heads, because they knew the debt was too big. It was like trying to carry a mountain on small hands. The servant kept begging again and again, holding on to hope like a child holding on to a last piece of bread. As people say today, when you hit rock bottom, even mercy looks like gold. The king saw everything. He saw the servant's fear. He saw his shaking body. He heard his broken words. The servant stayed on his knees, waiting, not knowing if mercy would come or if his life would fall apart right there in the palace. The room stayed silent. All eyes turned to the king because everyone knew the next decision would change the servant's life forever. The king did not speak right away. He looked at the servant still kneeling on the floor, shaking and afraid. The king's heart was touched. He thought about how heavy the servant's fear was and how small the man looked under such a big problem. The king knew something very important, that power is not only shown by punishment, but also by kindness. Slowly the king stood up from his throne. Everyone in the room held their breath. Then the king did something no one expected. Instead of giving the servant more time, he spoke gently and said that the debt was forgiven. Not a little part of it, not half of it, but all of it. The servant did not have to pay anything anymore. The servant lifted his head in surprise. His ears could hardly believe what they heard. The chains of fear that were holding his heart suddenly fell away. The weight that had been pressing him down disappeared in one moment. As people say today, mercy can change a life faster than money ever could. The king ordered the guards to let the servant go free. The servant stood up slowly, still shaking, but now from joy instead of fear. He bowed deeply to the king, his heart full and his eyes wide. He walked out of the palace doors a free man, carrying no debt and no punishment, only a second chance. The sun outside felt brighter, and the air felt lighter. The servant had been saved by kindness he did not deserve, but what he would do with that kindness had not yet been seen. The servant had only just stepped outside the palace. His feet were still moving fast with joy, and his heart was still beat. From the shock of being forgiven, a moment ago he was facing punishment, and now he was free. But instead of stopping to think or to be thankful, his mind quickly turned back to everyday worries and small anger. As he walked along the road, he suddenly saw one of his fellow servants. This man was someone he knew well. The fellow servant owed him a small amount of money. Not much at all, just a few pounds, something that could be paid back with time. When the forgiven servant saw him, his face changed. The joy in his eyes faded, and anger took its place. He rushed toward the fellow servant, grabbed him roughly by the neck, and began to choke him. His voice was hard and loud as he shouted, telling the man to pay back what he owed immediately. The fellow servant was shocked and afraid. He fell to his knees, just like the first servant had done earlier before the king. With a trembling voice, the fellow servant begged for patience. He said, "Please, give me time, and I will pay you back." His words sounded very familiar, because they were almost the same words the forgiven servant had used before the king. As people say today, how you treat others shows what you truly learned. People nearby stopped and watched. They could not understand how a man who had just received great mercy could now show no mercy at all. The moment was heavy, and the choice before the forgiven servant was clear. The forgiven servant did not listen to the cries of his fellow servant. His heart was hard now, even though it had just been saved by kindness. He did not remember how he had knelt on the palace floor. He did not remember the fear he felt when his life was about to fall apart. All he saw was the small money he wanted back. He pushed the fellow servant away and shouted that he did not care about excuses. He called for help and ordered that the man should be thrown into prison until every small coin was paid. The fellow servant cried louder, begging again and again, but the prison door was closed, and hope seemed to disappear behind the dark walls. As people say today, a hard heart forgets yesterday's mercy. Other servants were standing nearby. They had seen everything with their own eyes. They saw how the first servant had been forgiven a huge debt, and they saw how he refused to forgive a very small one. Their hearts were troubled. They felt sad, confused, and angry at the same time, because what they saw was not right. They whispered among themselves, shaking their heads slowly. The more they talked, the more they understood that silence would be wrong. They knew that truth must not be hidden, because lies grow when people look away. One by one, they agreed that the king needed to know what had happened. As people say today, what is done in the dark will always find light. So the servants went back to the palace. They stood before the king with respect and told him the whole story, from the moment the first servant was forgiven to the moment the fellow servant was thrown into prison. They did not add lies, and they did not remove anything. They spoke with honest hearts. The king listened carefully. His face grew serious, and the kindness in his eyes turned into deep disappointment. The room became quiet again, just like before, but this time the silence was heavy. The king sent for the forgiven servant at once, and the guards went out to bring him back. Far away, the forgiven servant did not yet know that his actions had been seen, reported, and remembered. But the truth was already walking back toward the guards, quickly found the servant and brought him back to the palace. He walked in with confidence, not knowing why he had been called again. He still thought everything was fine, because he had forgotten what mercy really meant. But as soon as he stood before the king, he felt something was wrong. The king's face was no longer soft. His eyes were strong and serious. The king spoke and reminded the servant of everything that had happened earlier that day. He told him how a very big debt was forgiven, a debt the servant could never pay in his whole life. Then the king asked a simple question, one that even a child could understand. He asked why the servant did not show the same kindness to his fellow servant, who owed only a small amount. The servant had no answer. His mouth was quiet, and his head fell low. The king's voice grew firm. He said that mercy is not something to receive and then hide. Mercy is something to share. He explained that when someone is forgiven much, they must also forgive others. As people say today, if kindness saved you, kindness should flow from you. The king was not angry because of the money, but because of the servant's heart. Because the servant refused to forgive, the king gave a final judgment. He ordered that the servant should face the punishment he was first saved from. The joy that once lifted the servant disappeared, and he finally understood too late that mercy wasted is mercy lost.